Welcome back to Business Week on Rise News. Now, in the past 12 months and since the start of 2024, Nigeria's central bank has announced a series of measures aimed at enhancing transparency and stability in the foreign exchange market while addressing malpractices. However, while analysts acknowledge the positive aspects of the CBN's recent policies aimed at managing pressures in the foreign exchange market, they highlight that these measures fail to directly address a fundamental issue of limited supply. Now, just days ago, the Naira fell to around 1,851 Naira to the dollar on the official market. And the next question is, where next? Next week, all eyes will also be on the CBN's first monetary policy rate decision as part of its first monetary policy committee meeting under Governor Olayemi Cardoso. Will its first rate decision be the fuel needed to drive inflation down in the months and weeks ahead? Now, thankfully, I don't have to attempt to answer these questions alone. Today, I'm glad to be joined in the studio by two great market analysts and commentators, Zeal, who is CEO of Graham Black Advisory, and Eizu, Uwaoma, who is the founder of Akaraiwe Consulting. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. It's great to have you on Business Week. Good morning to you both.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, of course, let's begin. We have quite a bit to get through. Not the best topics to be discussing, but we have to get through it, right? Of course, the Naira fell to as low as 1,851 on the official market this week. What would you say is responsible for this severe volatility? Let's begin with you, Eizu.
Okay, I'd start with some air of sarcasm, right? Currency, that's
what
we're talking about.
Yeah, we need that. We need
the
some
fundamental of currency is from the word current. My first degree is in mathematics, 3 masters, and one of the things in physics is that currency has to keep flowing. Electrons has to keep charging. Naked wire. Imagine what happens when you hold what's supposed to keep flowing. What happens? It shocks you, right? So sarcasm shouldn't be shocking that it shocks you because currency is supposed to keep flowing. The fundamental problem is that the forex, the dollar itself is not even flowing. It's a store of value. So people are holding on to it, right? So as long as people hold on to it, and it's the wrong people that are holding on to it, the manufacturers and people who need for socioeconomic reasons, paying school fees, paying medical bills, are the people who are supposed to have this thing. The manufacturers, the traders, especially the capital goods traders, not even commodity traders that are importing, but the people who hold it the most is as a form of investment. So it's really cool to have 20 million and convert it to dollars and hold it. As long as you keep holding currency, right? Stagnant water stinks. It has to keep flowing. So the problem is that it's stashed somewhere. And before, it used to be just individuals, politicians saving it maybe for elections. Now, even the government as infrastructure is saving it. So, so the federal government would probably send money to all the states, and then you have to convert it back. And no one is talking about it because no one wants to shake that table. So fundamentally, it needs to keep flowing until there are policies that keep it moving. You're going to keep having these issues. Of course, there's a high demand, common sense. There's so much demand for it. Everybody knows that. But what is it being demanded for is the fundamental problem. If it's being demanded for economic reasons, like manufacturers need to use it or traders need to use it, then it's fine. But there's now a new form of trading and investment. Matter of fact, the best investment now on the street will be convert your Naira to dollar. And it's such a buzz term. And what that does for our orientation is there's a FOMO, fear of missing out. So if I have small money in my account, I have to convert it to dollars. That's the real fundamental issue. Beyond the demand and all that supply commission, that's fundamental. But that's now a newer trend to it. And that's the real issue. As long as your manufacturers are not getting the money, you're having oil bunkery, right? So you're not reaching the OPEC standard for your quota system. As long as you have people storing this money, right? As long as no FDI coming in, right? So the balance of trade never happens, right? So what happens is that you're going to have enough, of course, more demand than supply of dollars. And that's the first fundamental problem. And I think people need to understand that. And the solution to it is also very simple. Just keep it moving. If there are policies that have to say, look, it's not okay. The same thing you see with almost everything in housing. There's a housing deficit, but the average guy who has enough money has 7 houses and still lives in a hotel. Right? And then there are people who don't have houses. If there's a policy that says it's almost impossible for you to have a house that is empty and not pay extra tax. You can't keep dollars as a domiciliary means, right? And leave it there for a while and hope that your balance of trade will be balanced enough for the Naira to gain value. It would always keep reducing in value. It's macroeconomics 101 is Adam Smith fundamental principle. And of course, all these are monetary policy. But don't forget, economics is not about monetary policy. It's an interdependency between monetary policy and fiscal policy. While you're putting too much pressure on CBN, there is another yin-yang to it, right? Because monetary policy and fiscal policy makes up macroeconomics. Monetary policy is about FX, inflation, and all that flow. But the second part is where we don't understand. Government spending is another fundamental problem, right? And taxation, because fiscal policy is government spending, taxation, and customs. Every time the customs brags and says we make more money, right? A factory is probably closing down. So a win for inflow from importation, right, is a loss for factories. So CBN policy is not enough. The solution to Nigeria's problem is not in CBN policies, it's actually in factories and warehouses. As long as the warehouses are locked, the factories are shut down, there's no security, there's no power. Like Nigerians say on the street, just they play.
Right, I really love the analogy and the touch of sarcasm that you had there earlier, because it just shows us that, of course, where there is a bit of, irony, sad irony to the entire situation. Before we move on to the next question, Zeal, I want to make sure you agree with him, or do you have a different point of view on why we have a severe volatility?
Well, I mean, it's a news show, not a debate, so I think we should just move on. I don't agree with most of it.
You don't agree with most of it?
No.
Okay, I want to touch on that. I want to get that. Give me one point you do not agree with.
Well, to start with, there's a lot of things that have happened. I think the question was about the foreign exchange market hitting a low of 1,800. First of all, there's a lot that's happened in the last 2 months. In fact, there's a lot that's happened in the last 6 months. One of those things that has happened is what Eizu touched on, policies to allow the free flow. Now, all of those policies, the central bank released a flurry of circulars. At the last count, there were about 11, and a lot of people complained about that. But people forget that the central bank is trying to move away from an era of disjointed policy making, where there was a lot of contradictory policies. The markets were fragmented because the body language of the central bank and the written policies did not coincide. And people forget that in terms of communicating policy, the central bank has only one means of doing that, and that's by circular. So the central bank cannot change structures, cannot change instructions, cannot change practice without informing the regulated entities on what to do next and what they're moving from. And the only legal way to do that is by releasing a circular so that everybody's on the same page. Now, all those circulars, the first 5 circulars were released in an attempt to free the market so that all the blockages that prevented the flow Eizu talked about are removed. Now, the central bank spent, as far as I know, 3 to 4 months planning, strategizing, interacting on what exactly ought to be done. And when all the planning phase finished, and then the implementation and execution phase started a few weeks ago, that's where we're seeing a flurry of circulars. They are not knee-jerk reactions. They are not ad hoc. They are very sequenced over a period of time. And once those circulars started taking effect, what people should know is last week, central bank sold money into the market twice. This week, central bank sold money into the market twice. I think it's quite disingenuous for the press to say the Naira fell to a low of 1,008 in the official market. Why don't they say the Naira appreciated to 1,000? Because in the same official market, if you look at the highs and the lows that are being quoted, you have 1,000 and you have 1,800. Right? Both rates are outliers. And I think in terms of doing any analysis, Eizu said, you studied mathematics, right? Mm-hmm. In many types of averaging, what you do is you remove the outliers that do not sync with the distribution. 1,008 is an outlier, 1,000 is an outlier. If you remove it and look at the concentration of trades over the last week, you will get rates between 1,400 to 1,450 in the official market. And this is coming from a period where we've had official rates quite high. So there's been, in the official market, a considerable appreciation because these policies are working. Now, let's not deceive ourselves and think that after, if I say the number of years, it becomes political, but if after a couple of years of distorting markets, you start reforming the markets through policies. Now, I'm not talking of the planning, through policies over a 2-week period, and people expect that everything should bounce back to what it was a few years ago. I think we're being disingenuous if we expect that. But are we on a pathway? If you look at the trend over the last 4 weeks, with these policies that have been released, with the circulars released, with the new reforms being done, with the interventions in the market, with the sale of foreign exchange, with everything going on, are we going in the right direction? And I don't think anybody who understands markets would disagree with that.
All right, I hear you saying let's not just manage our you want realistic expectations of of this body. So pretty much it's inherited a system on its own right, which sounds a bit monolithic. If you have the entire process of circulars going, this is what people are used to, but they don't understand the inner workings before they make the judgments. But of course, CBN Governor Olaimi Cardoso during the week did come out to declare $1.8 billion inflow into the FX market on the back of new reforms. Let's talk about that. Is this reassuring for FX shortages, or is this could this be a flash in the pan?
Absolutely. I'd like to agree that that's the right thing to do, right? Both textbook knowledge and common sense, right? Pump money into the market. But you see, the funny thing about it is, once again, my conversation is not even about the policies. Policies are frameworks, they're instructions. It's the implementation that is the problem, right? So it's not that you send money out, right? It's what is the money being used for when it's sent out, right? If you send the money out to stimulate the economy, so the circular flow of cash, right? That's good. But the problem is, it's not even how long will it last, because that's a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Like I always say, the solution to Nigeria's forex problem is factories, warehouses. It's not CBN, it's not taxation, it's not government. Those are just policies. You know, there are two fundamental principles in economics, right? Cartesians and the regular traditional. So here's the thing. That's the right thing they've done, without a doubt. Well done. But it's how long would it take for that amount of money to get back to people holding it again? As long as people hold these dollars when it's sent out, right? And then people aren't afraid of what would happen. Because naturally, what would happen, you see this in very fundamental things like Bitcoin. When there's a chance that there'll be a fall, what happens? People start to sell off. But now, it's like you say, oh, there's naturally what would have happened is that people should have panicked. So money is about to come in. If you're holding dollars, you don't want to hold it long enough because it's going to drop. But you know that you've seen this story over and over again. Matter, you're waiting for them to release the money, right? So you can probably even mop up a few more, right? So I think what CBN has done is the absolutely right thing on the short term, because you have to keep pumping that money. You know, whatever you used to get something, you have to use it to keeping that thing going. So I think that's the right thing to do. But the problem now is the implementation of what is being used for. If you release that money, does it go to manufacturers? Does it go to importers? Does it go to people that need it for socio-economic needs? Or do you have it and people start to mop it again? Because every time that happens, right, what happens in the long run is that that money becomes highly demanded for again. And economics 101, scarcity creates value. As long as demand is high, right, what happens is that the value for that thing goes really high as well. And then what that does is, it's a very directly proportional relationship, in my own opinion, right? You pump in money in, right? What happens is people, the market adjusts to that, right? But right now, the market isn't adjusting to it, because pumping that money in, what it's supposed to do is crash the dollars. It will do that very temporarily. Then, all of a sudden, people mop up. I think the fundamental thing, and I've been saying this, is people are mopping up is a store of value. It's not supposed to be a store of value, not Forex. It's supposed to be exchange, transaction. That's why it's called foreign exchange. It's no longer foreign exchange. It's now foreign storage of value. It's in people's hands. It's in domiciliary accounts. It's in warehouses. It's in people mopping it up, hoping for the next election, right? If you check what happens during elections, I mean, before it used to be Ghana must go. Have you noticed that Ghana must go don't exchange hands anymore? Not because Ghana must go and exchange hands. It's too bulky these days, right? I'm on air, but that's the fundamental problem. Until it's not okay. Your entertainers are charging for shows in Nigeria in dollars. The real estate companies are charging. So literally, it gets to a point. I was talking to a client who got held up in Russia because he was in a hotel in Russia and he couldn't get I think Russian economy's currency is called ruble. He couldn't, about ruble or so. He had money in his pocket, he had dollars, but the hotel wouldn't collect dollars. I'm sure if you go to any hotel and drop dollars, they'll be excited to take it because everybody needs dollar. So that's the fundamental problem. Everybody's hustling for dollar, whether you need it directly or not.
So you give a round of applause when you say this is all very short term.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same way? Is this a flash in the pan for you?
No, it's not a flash in the pan. So what has happened is that over the last couple of months, under Cardoso's governorship, like I said, there's been a lot of planning and strategic thinking. There've been a lot of investor meetings. Now, one of the issues why we were not getting foreign investments was because there was a distortion in the money market. You had your OMO bills at in the late teens, but you had your treasury bills in the single digits. And so there was a lot of monetary policy distortion with the tools that were used to lever the monetary policy. And so what happened was in all of the strategy, CBN said they needed to move the policy instruments, move the strategy, and move the fiscal and monetary authorities to coincide and agree and do everything with the DMO, the Ministry of Finance. All of that was what was done in the background. Now, 2 weeks ago, the DMO increased the amount of T-bill on offer from 470 billion to 1 trillion. That sent a signal to the investor community that interest rates were going to correct, right? Now, with all the reforms that had happened, when you see that your foreign exchange market is being reformed, that your interest rate policy is being harmonized, that the distortions in the market are being removed, that is a signal that investors see that this is a good opportunity to have a look at this economy again. And that is what happened. If you look at, for example, I like the period of 2012 to 2014, there's a metric that many Nigerians don't look at. It's net flows through the economy. When the currency was very stable, when there was no scarcity of foreign exchange, when you walk into your bank, whatever transaction you need to do, you fill your Form A or Form M and get it done. In that period, a lot of people said it's because we have high reserves. Not necessarily. It's because the net flows through the economy were very rich. 2011 to about 2014, those 3 years, average net flows through the economy, net flows, was over $90 billion. Now, like Eizu said, it needs to flow. So in terms of monitoring the net flows, what we need to do is to make sure that money comes in. It's like a water system. It's like fluid mechanics. Water comes in, it has to go out. If you block the outflow, you're going to have issues with the inflow. So these policies have released both outflow and inflow. So what we saw, the 1.8 billion that the Governor Cardoso mentioned, did not say that that money came in within 4 to 5 days of the announcement that treasury bills on offer moved from 471 billion to 1 trillion. This is the signaling that investors understand. Now, we have an MPC next week. We had another treasury bill auction this week. We had a bond auction this week. Now, we've had 2 weeks of consistency regarding merging the distortions in the monetary policy framework. When we go into the MPC is the committee that decides and consolidates all this, and we believe that they will go in line with what has been going on. This is the major signal to allow foreign investors and local investors have the confidence to come back into the economy, and we need those flows. Because as those flows go through the economy strengthens, the currency strengthens, the flows remove the panic, and the confidence returns, and then things can begin to normalize. It's a journey of a couple of months. It's not a flash in the pan. This is just the spark that ignites that flame.
You know, I think it's a very healthy discussion because you're both almost in polar. Your views are, you're quite a bit polarized there, but this is what makes it a healthy conversation. But because we don't have a lot of time, I want us to touch on a big question. We have the MPC. Do we see the impending rate decision on this? What exactly should we look out for on that? How is this going to have an effect on the FX market?
I think the MPC is crucial. This is the first MPC under Governor Cardoso, the first MPC in about 6 months. It's crucial because there have been a lot of documented reforms through circulars, through activities. But the question is, are they sustainable? It's the MPC that would answer that question through its policies when it comes out on Tuesday. Now, we have our current MPR rate at 18.75. We have inflation currently at 29. You're having 1,100 basis points negative real interest rates. That's a concern. Now, many people assume you have to move your MPR rate to match up with inflation. That's not entirely correct. What investors look at, those that understand how these things work, is they look at your inflation targeting. They look at what's your objective for inflation over a period, and is that objective in line with your monetary policy rate and other monetary policy moves? So the issue is, if you have an inflation targeting that shows inflation is going to come down, and then you're willing to move your monetary policy rate up to meet that inflation, you find that the move is required. It's not as drastic as people assume. Now, the question is, when that happens, what's the signaling? The signaling is a correction to a major market distortion we've had for a couple of years. Once that correction is signaled and cemented in monetary policy, then you find that investors are going to have a lot more confidence because they know the distortions did not allow things to function properly. For your economy to function properly, your monetary policy, your markets have to be effective. This is the work that the central bank has been doing over the past 3 months.
You know, hidden in that answer, I think I get a very clear idea of your inclination in terms of what this could happen. But Eizu, I want to give you a chance to touch on this very briefly. We have just a few seconds left.
Okay, so I'd move away from very technical stuff to non-technical stuff. So yes, let's use a variable for the MPC, which is MPR, right? MPR, naturally, interest rates are naturally proportional to FDIs, right? So a high interest rate means the FDIs want to come in, the foreign direct investments want to come in. But here's the funny thing about it. The foreign direct investors, right, I like to think of them as investors and investments. That's what people, they're actually human beings running companies. They're not only just looking at numbers, they're also looking at other macroeconomic variables that are even more social than numerical. For example, security, power, right? Those are all the things we need to sort out. Even branding and orientation. What's the perception? Because the only thing more important than what you're selling is what you make the buyer believe that you're buying. The only thing more important than what you'd ever sell is what you make the buyer believe that he's buying. What are the people outside looking in Nigeria believe that Nigeria is becoming, right? Is it becoming a safer place? Is it becoming a cheaper place to run business? Is it becoming more convenient to run business? Is it becoming a safer place? We know what the answers are. So that is not just even to defense, right? Or the military. It's also to orientation, right? Press, right? I mean, you'd be shocked that Chicago alone probably has 10 times more murder rate than Nigeria does. But we don't think of America and think of it like, oh, I mean, they probably killed more people on the streets than they've kidnapped in Nigeria, right? But so that's the non-technical part. So there has to be a lot of rebranding. And I don't know what the National Orientation Agency is doing, including explaining to people that it's unpatriotic to hold down another man's currency as a means of exchange. While you back that up with some nice policies, I like what the CBN is doing now with setting sort of almost, not capitalist, it's almost bullying people. For example, you bring money in and you must get it in Naira, right? And that's important. So the fundamental thing I'm saying here is that the non-technical and non-numerical variables like security, power, ease of doing business, convenience, right, are things that the government also needs to put in place.
All right, so it sounds like lots of variables, lots of dynamics playing around today, but it also boils down to perspective and subjectivity at some point. You don't seem to agree, but we have to have this conversation another time. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being on Business Week today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.